Questions and answers for the filmmaker and filmmakers.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joseph Bellamy, also known as Maynard Greyboy. This is Rob Weber, who for the last hour or so you've gotten to know as EJ. And
I just played a part.
we kind of want to make that very clear right off the bat.
It was an interesting polemic. I think it was way too long, okay? But
That was why.
I like the aspects of role reversal, okay, which is quite interesting. You as the white nigger, to use the word.
That's the deal right there. Ignorant and foolish, right on.
Right, that's right. And you as the articulate black man defying the stereotype.
Right, except, and at least from our perspective, in a situation like that, it's often assumed one person is the good person, one person is the bad person. We were hoping that it would be clear that neither of these people was the good or the bad.
Well, you both are loose cannons.
Right, and we were hoping to bring to the world the idea of beliefs are one thing, perspectives are one thing, right? Ideas, we all have the right to these things. When we start literally or even figuratively bashing each other in the face with it, none of us are going to get anywhere.
Is that why you filmed in black and white?
No, it's cheaper.
Oh, okay.
Actually, we filmed in color, and I want to make this very clear, just because it impressed me. Most of the visuals you saw in terms of what was colored, what was black and white, etc., that all came out of Rod's ability, first his technical ability to make it look that way, and his understanding of what the impact of doing that would be. So as to why it was black and white, again, it's a stark story, it's about stark contrast, lay it out in stark blacks and whites.
I felt it looked good that way.
It did.
Yeah, okay. You could hold that off your chest. What do you feel now?
It doesn't feel like getting it off my chest. It feels like something Joe should talk about because it's really not about me. For me, I've worked with Joe forever. I've known him for over 20 years. We went to high school together. I remember him at the swimming pool in our town when he was this tall. So it's just something that we do together. And for me, this was really just more about giving Joe a vehicle to express an idea. It was a what-if scenario.
Right.
What if this happened?
In terms of the feelings about having gotten it off my chest, as you phrase it, he meant that we've known each other for 20 years. We come from the same town. That town happens to be Needham, Massachusetts, which is, like much of Massachusetts, mostly white.
Of course.
Fairly liberal, fairly affluent. It's an affluent suburb of Boston, with all the social contingents that entails. In terms of getting it off my chest, this movie was my opportunity to say without rebuttal what I have been trying to say to the people that I grew up with most of my life. Because for most of the people that I know, and Rod's actually a sort of an exception to this, I'm the person of color that most of my friends know. So I've been having toned down versions of these conversations with the people that I grew up with since I was a child. I'm of mixed race, I'm half black, I'm half white. When you grow up in a white town, interesting things start happening. People start saying either, well, you're not really black, because I talk like them and I have their mannerisms, or Needham was a pro-busing town. I had the black kids coming in from the city telling me that I wasn't black enough. So what this film allowed me to do, it was interesting because I had to dig into things that I'm not even necessarily comfortable talking about, because I've had a lifetime of watching my mouth not to offend people around me. What's nice about the cinematic medium is I got to shoot the cannon off. And no one could dodge the bullet. You can choose not to watch it,
Right.
but it wasn't like a conversation with somebody I've known for 20 years who's going, oh, well, that's not the case. Well, I know you better than this. Well, that's not really the deal. And when it's a conversation, there's a give and take. And if I'm going to be any kind of a decent person, I have to allow that space for their give, and I have to be willing to take. In a situation like this, part of the reason that so much of what comes out of me is so venomous and so angry and so intense.
I know how to push his buttons.
He does know, and he does. But he knows how to push those buttons because you've seen those buttons get pushed since we were children. And I did feel like I got something off my chest. But it wasn't so much that I've never said these things before, I finally get to say them. I get to save them in one solid shot to have my peace. Now, am I as intense about these things as Maynard Brayboy was?
Hell no.
No, I'm not.
No.
And no one could be. Well, maybe you could be, I suppose. You could be that intense, you could be that extreme. I'm not that guy. But when you're not that guy, the thing you most want to be when you get the chance is that guy.
It was just, you made your thesis, is essentially what it was.
Yes.
Right? I gave it a framework with a story,
Yep.
the what-if scenario, and it was everything, every conversation we'd ever had. We had a lot of conversation about race, class, and the whole 9 yards. And certainly I could come up to you and I could say N-word 50 times in a row, but that's not what's going to get him going. What's going to get him going is really touching upon the subjects. And I had to do a fair amount of research about the right-wing philosophy, which quite honestly, I did not understand. There's some weird things that they get into. I did a lot of listening to this guy, Webster Tarpley. Webster Tarpley's idea, he gets into this whole thing about the Malthusian conspiracy. Now, okay, so you're shaking your head, so you know about this.
Yeah.
So the whole idea about this, it was a 17th or 18th century preacher who said that we need to keep the population down. And I believe it was Robert Thomas Malthus was his name. Okay, I switched it up. Okay, but anyhow, Preacher Malthus. So they made the jump from this guy to Adolf Hitler. How did they get there? So, as I've seen it by Webster Tarpley's explanation, is that, okay, so Malthus says keep the population down. He's talking about Darwinism. Oh, but the problem with Darwin is you have to separate Darwin's philosophy and Darwin the man. So there's Darwinism, but that's not Darwin. Darwin said that if there was a God, that he is a blind watchmaker. He created the universe as a blind watchmaker. He did not know what he's doing. Everything is random. So by this guy's philosophy, it is the randomness of the universe which liberals capitalize on. They say that there's global warming, and all these greenies are going around saying this so that they can make hate speech upon us. And it is this greening which allows them to say, well, we need to have less people. What is less people? Less people is genocide. So he's suggesting that every liberal that wants to save the planet by saying, oh, we've got to throw away our trash, is doing this simply because they are motivated to create a global genocide against all the good God-fearing conservatives.
In direct answer to your question, which was, how do you feel now? I don't feel any different. Because everything that was inside me that needed to be said by that character, like I said, is stuff I've been saying my whole life. If there is any difference in the way I feel, it's that I feel that I have, at least in this one venue, I feel that I have stood by my statement of myself as an artist, which is for all of us who have the creative spirit within us, is to speak the truth, whether it's comfortable or not. I have done that. I didn't do it necessarily in a way people like. I didn't do it necessarily in a way that I would even like. But if you're asking me how I feel now, I feel like for better or for worse, expression of self, even the darkest side of myself, which is what Maynard Brayboy is, needs to happen. And so it has happened. And so in the very least, good, bad, indifferent, I feel that I've fulfilled my necessary edict as an artist. As far as my feelings on race, I'm a person of two races. I'm in a country that's quietly torn apart by race. So my feelings will be probably complex and unresolved till the day I die. But how do I feel about this project? I feel that for better or for worse, what needed to be expressed that was in here got expressed. And people say, well, how do you feel about how people are going to respond to that? People might hate you for that. That's their prerogative to do so. I'm not trying to pick a fight with anybody. I'm not trying to make an enemy out of it. We're not trying to make anybody angry or uncomfortable necessarily. But sometimes...
I'd say to the contrary. For me, it was about generating discussion,
Well,
which is to bring people together.
which may be uncomfortable.
And just recently, I was saying, yesterday I bumped into one of my right-wing friends, and honestly, with Facebook and all the social media, it drives me crazy, the stuff that people put out there. but when I bump into them in person, it seems the venom isn't there. We can act like people and actually get along.
In the beginning of the movie, you kind of started with a scenario where there was an abused child, and he was trying to indirectly and maybe wrongly so.
His character was doing what seemed right from his
What
character's
seemed right to
perspective.
him, and none of that, and during that whole walk through the woods, you know, you kind of wondered what was happening with the child, and whether you were going to find out that the child died while you were dealing with that issue. And so it almost created a situation that you were expecting an answer to, which never was answered.
We drew out a thread and left it loose end.
Yes.
It was one of the things that I absolutely had hoped to address, but with most of the films that we've done in recent days, we put them out there under a manifesto that I created, which is essentially a way to, like you say, get things off of our chest, but more than that is to get movies made. And as a result of that, they're very flawed films.
I wanted to ask a question to your question. Had we closed off that thread, would it have affected your perception of his character? Knowing more about what happened in his life, his character, the guy that was trying to essentially, ostensibly defend his daughter.
But, and you're asking me to say it again?
My question is, had we tied up that loose end?
Well, tied up how? How did it end? You
Well, it
know?
doesn't end. And that's our bad.
No, but when you're saying, had you tied it up, meaning...
So your answer is, depending on how it ended,
Depending on how it
might have been different
Right,
effects.
yeah.
I'll tell you exactly how I had it in my head, is that the kid was going to be okay. But to me, I don't think that was really going to change the relationship between Joe and I.
Well, in the conversation in the woods, that wasn't brought up. He said, that could have been brought up, and maybe there would have been some sympathy, and the hanging might not have happened, you know, because...
Right.
I just wonder if...
For all of our talk of humanity.
Why wasn't that brought up and brought up into the equation?
Well, there's a mechanic... Huh?
I said, in all honesty, expedience.
Well, there's a mechanical answer, which is that, with the exception of one of the people here in the movie, we did this in one take. It was just improv. We didn't have any script other than the skeleton. And I believe that we actually did touch upon it at one point, but what we did wasn't strong. It didn't feel strong enough. So you do it in one take, and there it is. It's out in the world.
That's unbelievable.
We have a relation. Yep.
Unreal.
Well,
Sir, your question.
thank you.
Well, it's more a response to that, and I liked your answer about, would you know more or less about that particular character?
Yes.
And I feel like you don't have to wrap up every loose end. I think it's better to leave a lot of loose ends dangling. What was more important is to understand character.
We felt it didn't matter. I agree.
Part of it, to be honest, a real part of it, in terms of leaving that and other things unanswered, a lot of what we were trying to explore here was how ridiculous hyper-extremism is. And it was I will freely admit that this next thing I'm about to say occurred by accident, because we did leave unresolved the thread you were talking about. But in that circumstance, it delves deeper into the irrationality of the hyper-extremism. Pardon my use of the word, I've stolen this man from his fucking family. You see what I mean? I mean, in 30 seconds, his life went from whatever he thought it was going to be that day to in the trunk of some lunatic's car. And almost by virtue of that, leaving the rest of his story unanswered, again, by accident, further illustrates the insanity of my character. I make no pretense that my character was in any way a rational human being. He could rationalize what he was doing, but this was not a man of a stable mind. And I think again, by accident, the act of pulling his character completely out of his life, for no other reason than satisfying my character's emotional needs, I believe that, again, by accident, leaving that thread open sort of served that purpose. Miss, you had a question?
Just because, you know, during the part when you're walking through the woods, I mean, there is a dialogue of
Yes.
sorts. And I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around, do you need to tie someone down to get to that point to have that dialogue? And I was
No, you don't.
hoping there was some chance for some sort of reconciliation or understanding that would come out of that, and there was no humanization of the other.
And that was the intent.
Yeah.
That was the intention. What we were going for is the danger of what happens when you refuse the humanity of the other. It's exactly what we were trying to illustrate.
So you're being the artist that's provocateur.
Yes, exactly. This was not, the intention behind this project was not for everybody to go, my, what a marvelous film. Matter of fact, if most of you walk out of here going, what the F? Wait till I go.
I would guess most of you get people just to walk out.
Well, you know, we actually, Rod and I were sitting right here.
Keeping count
We've kept count of people who got up and walked out. And I even did a survey I was out by the door for the last hour, talking to people who left. And I heard everything from, I don't like the subject matter, I can't handle the profanity, I don't get it. All of these are perfectly valid reactions, and I thank those people for even the 30 seconds they gave to our film. Because even if they got up and said, I don't want to do this, they have still been touched by the project.
Well, what's interesting was sit here and think about, like, well, whether you could, I mean, obviously, the subject matter and the way it's done makes you squirm. You know, I mean, pretty much, I don't know what it was, 90 minutes of squirming. And it's very, very uncomfortable, and you sit and you think about, well, is there a way to say what you're saying that doesn't make you squirm? And there really aren't that many ways to do it. I mean, it's people in America don't really want to talk about race, and there aren't a lot of nice ways to talk about it.
People do. I don't know if you checked out what Ann Coulter put out online 2 days ago, but she's basically talking about, not you, but people like me, and insists that after 200 years, liberals still can't get over being racists. And she insists that because the Democrats ran the South during the Civil War and before, that somehow this still transcribes to what we're doing now. You know, honestly, I'm like, I don't care what happened during the Civil War. Ann Coulter's just a crazy person. There are people out there who are highly concerned about this, and they're mostly on the right-wing extremes.
I would have to disagree with you on that. I would have to disagree with you on that.
Well, hit me. Amen with it.
This is, wow, I'm looking out of his eyes, I'm realizing how deep of a hole I'm about to dig for myself. White people on the right. Because you can't find a brother in this country who isn't thinking about it all the time.
Oh, hey, I know about white people on the right. Facebook again, people.
So trying to say, this is interesting, you guys are about to see me and him make an argument. Trying to say that, you know, nobody wants to talk about, the people who want to talk about it are the hardcore crazies on the right. The people who want to preach and rant about it may be the hardcore crazies on the right. But I can tell you, from growing up in our background, if not the first thought, the second thought in my mind, every single day that I woke up and went to Lima High School, or hung out with our friends, or whatever. Now, I won't call that experience on my part a luxury, because it certainly wasn't pleasant, but it is a perspective. Part of what I think allowed me to do this film is I've walked the entire 38 years of my life, one foot in one world, one foot in the other. Sir?
Yeah, well, question and observation. The question would be, as this sole elitist in this room,
That's right, you raised your hand.
Seeing the scenes with you dragging EJ along, maybe call to mind Waiting for Godot and Lucky and Pozzo.
Yes.
Okay, that's in your mind?
And it's that same sense of futility born of human lack of understanding of the situation.
Yeah.
It is that same sense of where do we go from here.
Right. And then the observation on Coulter would be sort of her, I'm interpreting her take as saying, well, all white people are racist. Anyways, it's the liberals who are hypocritical about it and say they're not racist, and the conservatives are not hypocritical.
That's not her view.
No?
From the way I interpret it, she's saying that Republicans freed the slaves, go fuck yourself. You know.
Except the only problem with the Republican Party of 2012 was
Not the same Republicans.
Abraham Lincoln.
Right, but she makes the point, you can't escape your history. It's the Democrats that were bringing down the black man.
I'll go so far as to say that regardless of
they're not the same person.
She's an ideologue who doesn't understand American history.
No, she does understand. That's what's so sick about her. She does understand. She's just flipping it over to get a response.
She's misreading and misconceiving the reality of the history.
Exactly. Intentionally
for ideological reasons.
Right.
I would go so far as to say this, regardless of Ms. Coulter's remarks or any anyone from either side remarks in this situation. And again, this may be an unpopular, uncomfortable statement. We're all racist, okay? Because if we weren't, there wouldn't be countries, there wouldn't be cultures, there wouldn't be different languages. We all want to be with our own. Now, whether or not you have the intellectual, spiritual, and emotional capacity to step beyond that basic human need to be around your own and reach out to others, that's the important question. Because deep down inside, all of us have a greater affinity for our own. Whether or not we choose to make that the beginning or the end of our concepts of other people, that's where the question is. Do we
Sometimes-
stop at, I want to be around people like me? Or do we start with, I'm comfortable around people like me?